The horror unfolding in Sudan is not the product of sudden violence, nor the result of a conflict that caught the world by surprise. It is the culmination of months of warnings, reports and pleas warnings that have now materialized in the most devastating way in the city of El-Fasher. As the United Nations gathers in Geneva, the tone is different from previous sessions. It is sharper, more urgent and uncomfortably direct. The UN's top human rights official, Volker Türk, is no longer asking the world to pay attention. He is accusing it of failing. In his latest address, Türk paints a picture that borders on unimaginable. Bloodstains large enough to be photographed from space, neighborhoods left in ruins, entire communities hunted based on ethnicity, and civilians straining to survive under siege. For months, he says, the world was warned repeatedly, yet the events that followed in El-Fasher now stand as a testament to how little those warnings were heeded. His call is not just to governments, it is to all who have influence, power and a voice in shaping global action. He is telling them that the stain on the international conscience, while invisible, is as real as the blood on the ground. The devastation of El-Fasher did not begin with its fall. It began with a suffocating siege that cut off food, medicine and basic supplies to hundreds of thousands of people. Families survived on animal feed. Children ate peanut shells to stay alive. Hospitals ran out of fuel, and doctors worked in darkness, often with no anesthesia and no equipment. Humanitarian convoys, when they could move at all, were blocked by armed groups or struck by gunfire. The population was left in an impossible situation, trapped inside a city that was running out of time. When the rapid support forces advanced into El-Fasher, the UN said it feared a bloodbath. Those fears were realized. Reports emerged of mass killings, ethnic executions, gang rapes and brutal acts of torture. Witnesses from the region described scenes of desperation, families fleeing as their desperation. Neighborhoods were set ablaze, men separated from their communities based on tribal identity, and women subjected to sexual violence intended to terrorize and humiliate entire groups. The UN says these are not isolated acts, but part of a systematic pattern, an organized effort to break the will of the population. The Sudanese government, represented at the UN session by Ambassador Hassan Hamid Hassan, expressed its own fury at the situation, not only at the RSF and those supporting it, but at the world's slow response. He questioned why global mobilization only accelerated after satellite images revealed the scale of the massacre. He asked where the international pressure had been when Sudan was sounding the alarm in every available forum, from Geneva to New York. And he named the foreign state he says is equipping the RSF with drones, advanced weapons and mercenaries, the United Arab Emirates. The ambassador's central argument was blunt. He said that what is happening in Sudan is nothing less than an attempt to exterminate specific ethnic groups and replace them with others. In his words, if this is not genocide, then what is? His statement added a political charge to the already tense atmosphere in the hall, but it also reflected a widespread view among human rights organizations that Sudan is rapidly sliding toward the kind of atrocity that history judges most harshly. To understand the gravity of this moment, it is important to understand where Sudan stands today. The conflict, which erupted between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces in 2023, has fractured a nation of more than 45 million people. Once viewed as a fragile but hopeful country emerging from dictatorship, Sudan has instead become the scene of one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Cities have been destroyed, entire regions have been depopulated, millions have been displaced. The Sahara has become a corridor of refugees fleeing violence, hunger and lawlessness. El-Fasher is not just another city, it is the capital of North Darfur, one of the most volatile regions in the country and a symbolic heart of the Darfur conflict that shook the world in the early 2000s. The city had long resisted RSF control, becoming the last major stronghold in Darfur held by the Sudanese army. It was home to a patchwork of communities, including those who had already lived through previous episodes of mass violence. Many believed that if El-Fasher fell, The humanitarian consequences would surpass even the worst expectations. Those fears have now been validated. As Volker Türk spoke in Geneva, he reminded the world that the pattern in Sudan has been consistent since the conflict began. Warnings, inaction, and tragedy repeated in a devastating cycle. He described a landscape where villages have been erased, where famine is spreading rapidly across conflict zones, and where humanitarian workers are attacked, detained, or killed simply for trying to deliver aid. He said that the cruelty used to subjugate the population is stark, deliberate, and without any apparent limits. Türk's message was echoed by humanitarian agencies who say Sudan is on the brink of becoming the world's largest hunger crisis, with harvests destroyed, supply routes blocked, and markets burned. Millions are now at risk of starvation. Children are dying from preventable diseases because clinics no longer function. UN emergency teams warn that the humanitarian system in Sudan is collapsing, and unless access improves immediately, tens of thousands more civilians could die in the coming months. But the crisis is not only humanitarian, it is deeply political. The RSF, born from the Janjaweed militias accused of atrocities in previous decades, has expanded its military reach with foreign support. The Sudanese government, meanwhile, faces internal divisions, limited control, and diminishing resources. International diplomacy has been fragmented, with powerful nations divided over strategy and influence. Sanctions, arms embargo proposals, and peace initiatives have all struggled to gain traction. And as a result, the war has spiraled far beyond what many believed possible when it began. The UN session presented a rare moment of clarity. Every speaker, regardless of political alignment, acknowledged that Sudan is facing a catastrophe. But acknowledgement alone does not save lives. Türk urged the world to take specific steps, pressure all parties to allow humanitarian aid into besieged regions, enforce a halt to the supply of weapons flowing to the RSF, support an independent investigation into atrocities, and push relentlessly for a ceasefire that civilians desperately need. He warned that the world cannot continue operating under the illusion that Sudan's conflict will resolve itself. The stakes are enormous. Sudan borders 7 countries. Each is dealing with its own insecurity, refugees, economic pressures, or extremist groups. If the conflict continues at its current pace, the consequences will not remain within Sudan's borders. A full destabilization of the region could produce ripple effects stretching across Africa, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean. Analysts warn that mass displacement could accelerate, armed groups could proliferate, and countries already struggling with instability could face overwhelming pressure. Yet, amid all the politics, the most important reality is the suffering of ordinary people. Civilians in El-Fasher, many of whom have already endured decades of war, now face a future filled with trauma, loss, and fear. Survivors describe how families dug makeshift graves as bombardment destroyed entire districts. Others risked their lives searching for missing relatives in streets littered with rubble and debris. Mothers carried infants for miles in search of water or shelter. Aid workers, even when allowed brief access, found hospitals filled with patients who had gone days without treatment. In the face of such suffering, Türk's speech challenges global leaders to choose between action and complicity. His words are not framed as diplomacy, but as a moral verdict. He states plainly that the world cannot claim ignorance, it cannot claim surprise. It cannot claim to have done enough. The evidence is overwhelming, the casualties staggering, and the trajectory unmistakable. The Sudanese ambassador's intervention, while politically charged, reflects a truth that many in Sudan feel deeply, that the world responds to crises only when the evidence of horror becomes too impossible to ignore. His frustration is directed not only at the RSF and their foreign backers, but at the delay in mobilizing the tools of international pressure that might have prevented the fall of El-Fasher. Looking ahead, the question is not just how to stop the violence, but how to restore a sense of humanity to a country shattered by war. Peace will require more than a ceasefire. It will require rebuilding trust, addressing the grievances of communities targeted for decades, holding perpetrators accountable, and ensuring that humanitarian aid reaches those who need it most. It will require a long-term international commitment to stability and justice, one that has so far been inconsistent. For now, the world is left with a defining moment. The UN has spoken, victims have cried out, evidence has been recorded. The images from El-Fasher will remain images from the ground and images from space. The stain on the international community, as Volker Türk warned, is less visible but no less damaging. The question is whether global leaders will treat this moment as a turning point or whether El-Fasher will become another chapter in a long history of preventable tragedies. Sudan's future hangs in the balance, and as the UN session closes, one truth remains impossible to ignore: the world has been warned. What happens now will determine how history remembers this moment, either as the instant global resolve finally surged or as the moment when the world looked away again while a nation bled.
Concretely, that means several things must happen. First, and we warned at the fall of the city to the rapid support forces action to prevent continued large-scale human rights violations, often ethnically motivated, to subjugate and control an entire population.
Merci pour votre déclaration. Je donne maintenant la parole à son Excellence.
Deliberate intention to inflict conditions of life. This is forbidden in Article 54 of the additional.
يكون في هذا العالم حتى الآن من يعتقد بأن هذه الميليشيا الإرهابية المتوحشة في توصيف النزاع القائم على مساواة ميليشيا بكل هذا السجل الدولي الإنساني والقانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان وكافة الأعراف والسقوط. هنا منذ اندلاع تمرد الميليشيا الإرهابية محدد بمجموعات سكانية محددة، فما هي الإبادة الجماعية إن لم تكن.
Thank you, Mr. President. This statement is on behalf of the core group of Sudan Core.
We warned repeatedly about the strangulating, suffocating siege under which people were reduced to eating animal feet and peanut shells. We warned about the spread of famine as people starved to death. And we warned that the fall of the city to the rapid support forces would result in a bloodbath. So none of us should be surprised by reports that since the RSF took control of El-Fasher, there have been mass killings of civilians, ethnically targeted executions, sexual violence, including gang rape, abductions for ransom, widespread arbitrary detentions, attacks on health facilities, medical staff and humanitarian workers, and other appalling atrocities. This is a pattern that we have documented time and again in this conflict. But our wake-up calls were not heeded. Bloodstains on the ground in El-Fasher have been photographed from space. The stain on the record of the international community is less visible, but no less damaging. The international community has a clear duty to act. There has been too much pretense and performance and too little action. It must stand up against these atrocities, a display of naked cruelty used to subjugate and control an entire population.
سيد الرئيس، ثم هل كان المجتمع الدولي ينتظر وقوع كل هذه الفظائع حتى يتداعى الآن لنجدة الفاشر؟ وأين كان هذا التداعي عندما كنا نقرع الأجراس في كل منابر الأمم المتحدة هنا في جنيف وغيرها للضغط على الميليشيا المتمردة والدولة الراعية لها التي تمدها بالعتاد العسكري المتطور والمسيرات الاستراتيجية والمرتزقة بما في ذلك من وراء البحار، أعني دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة. إن الذي يجري في السودان هو حرب وجودية تستهدف إبادة مكونات بعينها وإحلالها بمكونات بديلة، ليس سوى ذلك ولا أقل من ذلك. وقد شاهدتم كيف أن القتل في الفاشر تم ويتم على أساس العرق بل واللون لمجموعات سكانية محددة. فما هي الإبادة الجماعية إن لم تكن تلك هي